7 years ago, I returned from sabbatical and recited Birkat Gomel, a blessing of thanksgiving, offered when we've returned from a long journey, and Rabbi Sager of blessed memory stood next to me at the Torah and explained the text of the blessing that we bless God for bestowing upon us chayavim tovot, literally good obligations. And he explained it to mean that when we experience something good, we inherit an obligation to return and to share and testify to what we saw. I've shared many stories from my sabbatical. I have waited until now to share this one. As the new year begins, I want to fulfill my obligation to share a gift that God gave to me on Friday, February 28th, 2025, Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new month of Adar in the year 5785. I pulled my small rental car over to the side of the road at the base of the Golan Heights. I had spent a week at Ariel Sager's home, finally fulfilling a promise that I'd been making for years on one of my trips to Israel, to leave Jerusalem and spend 4 precious days with her and her family in her home on a rural moshav called Nov on the Golan Heights Plateau. Why now? In parts because I had more time on my sabbatical, but also because it was a trip that Rabbi Sager had wanted to make. I remember how in the last months of his life, how much he wanted to go to Israel, not to walk the alleyways of the old city or sit in the Hartman Beit Midrash as he had done so many times before, but just to sit on the floor in Ariel's living room and inhabit the wondrous worlds of his grandchildren, to play in their questions and their imaginations. The trip was not to be. He was too sick, and the costs of it on his body would have been too great. I think I went to Ariel's living room floor to comfort and to be comforted, to remember to drink a cup of tea and learn with Ariel's Israeli friends some Amichai poetry, who marveled at this American rabbi who knew Amichai's Hebrew poetry so well and taught it in ways that they had never experienced before. I went to meet the family's pet lizard, to drink a beer with Ariel's husband Avrami as the sun set, to eat in the community restaurant when their eldest daughter Maya came home for the weekend from the army, and to watch as the owner gave her a big hug and sat her down and said, "You look tired," because more is asked of these kids at a young age than we can possibly imagine. We're going to spoil you. Your meal is on us. I went to find my friend, whose harmonies I still hear and cannot quite replace. And to feel his spirit hovering in those places he loved so much. That week, I also went on long runs along the edge of a rocky canyon and on a 40-mile bike ride with Mount Hermon snow in the distance, winding my way through windmills and battlefields where Israeli and Syrian soldiers fought and died 50 years ago. And that Friday morning, I left Ariel's moshav and stopped in Katzrin, but I just went to swim laps in the local pool so I'd be ready for the triathlon that awaited me at the end of May. When I arrived to Israel in mid-February, a few weeks before, my Aunt Debbie and I drove to Kibbutz Gezer to visit Lee Siegel, one of Gladys's sons, Zichrona Livracha, and Lee's wife, Shali. We first went there, my Aunt Debbie and I, in November of 2023, just a month after the events of October 7th, when Lee's brother Keith and his wife Aviva had been snatched away. Lee's days were filled with meetings and interviews and speeches, but behind his eyes, I felt as if he were elsewhere with his brother and sister-in-law in Gaza. There were T-shirts and ribbons and pins, signs of a great mobilization to bring them home now. I was traveling with a group of rabbis on that trip, and Shali sent me off with a box of oatmeal chocolate chip cookies, baked by her in a kitchen in the middle of central Israel, but the recipe was familiar because it was Hunter Levinson's oatmeal chocolate chip cookie recipe that had made its way from the holiness of North Carolina to the holiness of the land of Israel. There were happy rabbis on the bus throughout the days. I saw Lee and Shili again in the summer of 2024. Lee invited me to the Knesset, where I walked with him through a chaotic circus of meetings and tears and hugs and cameras and signs and steely courage and singular resolve to bring the hostages home. It was February now. A ceasefire had been announced. I watched on TV when I was in California as Keith was paraded in some sick display, gaunt and costumed by Hamas before a savage crowd, and then later as he collapsed into the crying arms of his wife and children and brothers, and later his sister. When I arrived in Tel Aviv, my aunt and I again made pilgrimage to Lee and Shali's in Kibbutz Gezer, in this green rural center of the country. Lee and I embraced in a long, warm hug. He felt thinner. I felt his bony frame and the scratchy whiskers of his beard on my face. We rejoiced at Keith's return. I told him that Keith should, of course, do whatever he needed to do in order to heal. But if it would be in any way helpful for him to speak with me, because he had not been able to be at his mom's funeral, and because I'd spent so many hours with Gladys while he was in captivity, that I would be honored to do so, Lee took my phone number and said he'd pass it on to Keith in case he wanted to talk. Which is why I pulled my rental car to the side of the road at the bottom of the Golan Heights when I got a call from an Israeli number I didn't recognize. Hello, I said. Hi, Rabbi Greyber. It's Keith Siegel. Hi, Keith. It's really good to hear your voice. He said, I'm sorry I didn't call before. It's been a very busy few weeks. I said, Keith, you don't need to apologize. And in the back of my mind, I thought to myself, you don't ever need to apologize for anything ever again. We made arrangements to meet at Kibbutz Gazit, where Keith and Aviva now live with their children. I pulled up to the kibbutz. There were yellow hostage flags and Israeli flags planted beneath the trees at the entrance. and a sign saying Digalim Shel Tikva, flags of hope, and a large sign saying Keith Baruch Shuvcha, a variation on Baruch Haba, which is how you say welcome. It literally means blessed is the one who comes. And this one read, Baruch Shuvcha, blessed are you in your return. And elsewhere on the sign it read, Ad Hechatuf Ha'acharon, until the very last hostage is home. I followed the driving directions through the kibbutz and pulled my car into a parking space when I saw Keith standing beneath a tree. He saw me, I walked over, and we embraced a long, warm hug. And as we did, I heard a small voice cry out, "Hi, Saba. Hi, Grandpa." And I felt Keith's grandson hugging Keith's leg between us. And in that moment, I remember thinking and feeling, I am witnessing redemption. Not some grand, messianic, otherworldly redemption like when the lion will lie down with the lamb, but something much more of this world. Not tikkun olam, the whole world's repair, but a little corner of this world that had been made right. Not a tikiyah gedolah, a long and final shofar blast, but one note, true and sure. The prophet Zechariah once dreamed about redemption this way, not something cosmic. He said, when redemption comes, there will be old men and women in the squares of Jerusalem, each with a staff in hand, because they've gotten the chance to grow old. The squares of the city shall be crowded with boys and girls playing. God says, it may seem impossible to the remnant of this people, but is it impossible for me? To which I, Rabbi Daniel Greyber, on Rosh Hashanah 57-58, testify before this holy community of Bethel Synagogue in Durham, North Carolina. No, it is not impossible. I saw a glimpse of it with my own eyes. Someone once taught that the word tikva, hope, contains within it another word, kav, which means line. Because hope is the process of drawing from one point to another. And I want to invite every one of us to draw a line from this holy point that I've shared with you, that holy moment on Kibbutz Gazit when Gladys's son, who was trapped and tortured in hellish darkness for nearly 500 days, heard the words, "Hi, Saba." To draw a line from that moment to our own lives. I know it is an understatement to say that it is pretty hard to hope as this year begins. You don't need for me to tell you the horror of the war in Gaza, of how Israel is led by a coalition that a right-leaning columnist, Yossi Klein Halevi, has called a coalition of the fanatical and the corrupt. And also how this world doesn't seem to be able to hold Israeli trauma and pain alongside with Gazans. Franklin Foer wrote in the Atlantic last year how the golden age of American Jewry is drawing to a close, giving way to a golden age of conspiracy, reckless hyperbole, and political violence. And 250 years after the Declaration of Independence, America's democratic future feels far from secure. And anti-Semitism is at its highest level in decades, but our allies and our neighbors just don't seem to get how scared and how vulnerable we feel. But we are not without hope. We are not helpless. I was having a rough time a few weeks ago, and Andrea Ginsberg sent me an encouraging text reminding me what's most important about our community. She said, "The world is not what we have been used to the past few decades. Why be part of Bethel? Because no matter what side of politics you are on, no matter what blue you bleed, whatever disagreement you had in a committee meeting, when life events happen to us, we show up for each other. In this world, we need this. We have to continue showing up for each other." Some people have told me, I need the synagogue, I need the rabbi to say more or less, somehow equating belonging by what we denounce or don't. I don't think that Bethel can be everything that every Jew needs. I'm grateful that there are other synagogues and manifestations of Jewish community here in Durham and Chapel Hill. In the end, I only want for every person, every Jew, to find a place where they can feel at home, can feel seen and heard and known. But please know that our Bethel is much more than what we say to the world around us. We are a community who shows up for each other. And that, in this world, is something extremely rare and precious, and not to be discarded lightly. We lost our matriarch this year. From when Gladys Siegel was a young mom until she was a great-grandma, she gave us many gifts, but maybe the greatest one was teaching us how to show up. And who is going to be Gladys now? Who is going to send dozens of emails of love on Friday afternoons that tell so many people, you are loved? Who's going to have a list of people to call and check on them and just tell them, you matter? Who is going to make home-cooked meals and show up to Shivas and unveilings? Who's going to tell our community, you need to give to Bethel, to Jewish for Good, to Meals on Wheels, and to whom you just can't say no? Not only because you don't want to say no to Gladys, because you knew that if you said no to Gladys, it wasn't just saying no to her, it was saying no to the best part of yourself. It was saying no to community and the chance to do something right and to be your best self, that's what Gladys was offering you. That is the question that her death continues to ask every one of us and our whole community. She was our matriarch, and it is up to us to carry forward what she can no longer carry for us. Lucy Siegel, I don't know if she's here today. Maybe. She said she might be able to come, but Gladys's daughter, Keith, and Lee and David's sister will speak to us during Yom Kippur Musaf 10 days from now. Gladys's unveiling will take place on Friday of Thanksgiving weekend. It is open to the entire community. On Sunday morning, Hunter Levinson and Michelle Schrott and Hal Sandick have been recruited, dragooned, happily volunteered to help us make a pancaked breakfast using Keith's famous pancake recipe in honor of all the hostages who have not yet, but we hope and pray will come home soon. Keith and Aviva are going to speak that Sunday morning before they leave town. And if you are in town, I encourage you to mark your calendars. And if you want to help us make pancakes, reach out to the office. Friends, Jennifer and I left a much bigger and more established Jewish community in Los Angeles 14 years ago. And we brought our boys here, not only because we sensed that Durham is a special place and that it was growing, and because of the quality of life being simpler and better, but because Jewish community here is not done by someone else. It's up to us. And we have found in Bethel a deeper sense of Jewish community than we have known anywhere else. Maybe it is pluralism by necessity. Maybe we tolerate and work with one another because there simply isn't the luxury of having our own synagogue and the one I won't set foot into. But when I meet rabbis and scholars and visitors to our home here on Watt Street, so many of them stand in awe and admiration and envy for who we are and what we have built. Yes, we feel alone in the world, in America. But as Rabbi Sager used to say, we alone must do it, but we need not do it alone. And so, as this year begins, I conclude with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hagomer l'chayavim tovot, shegamalani kol tov. I praise Adonai, our God, who is sovereign over all and who blessed and bestowed upon me a good obligation to return and to share with you a moment of redemption from Rosh Chodesh Adar in Kibbutz Gazit, when I felt Keith's grandson hugging his leg after 500 days in captivity. And I pray that that moment may help us to draw a line to our lives and give us hope when we feel scared about the future, and may remind us to never forget the power of showing up for one another and how it can hold back the darkness and create a better future for us all. Shana Tova.